Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world lit mostly by flame, where royalty wakes not to the soft chime of a phone alarm, but to the gentle, smoky crackle of a tallow candle, guttering on a wooden stand. You're stepping into the earliest centuries of medieval kingship, an era that feels half-remembered, half-imagined, and entirely real under your feet. And just so you know, you probably won't survive this lifestyle for more than 3 days, but hey, it's bedtime, not a survival course. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the sun because the royal household believes dawn counts as mid-morning. Cold air sits heavy in the room, no windows, no glass, just shutters holding back a breeze that smells faintly of smoke and wet earth. A servant stirs the embers in the brazier, trying to coax something resembling heat into the chamber. It fails. You feel the kind of chill that medieval chroniclers always described as bracing, which is historian speak for absolutely miserable. A candle wobbles beside you, the flame bending like it's already tired. Early medieval kingship isn't grand yet. No Gothic cathedrals or jewel-encrusted crowns shaped like architectural blueprints. Instead, you sit on a bed stuffed with straw, wrapped in rough wool blankets. And the closest thing to royal luxury is the fact that someone else has to be up before you. That someone is already bustling about, muttering prayers, adjusting linens, and silently wondering why royalty never wakes up in a better mood. Outside your room, monastic scribes have been awake for hours. They've copied half a psalm by now. Meanwhile, you're struggling to convince your joints to function. The medieval world demands you look powerful the moment you sit upright, even if your spine sounds like a sack of walnuts cracking. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Most early medieval rulers didn't actually wake in palaces. They woke in fortified halls that were basically large wooden barns with better carpets. These buildings weren't majestic. They were drafty, noisy, and often smelled faintly of the entire household and its animals. Royal power, back then, wasn't performed through architecture. It was performed through presence. People watched how you carried yourself, how you rose, how you spoke, how you didn't trip over the uneven floorboards on the way to the hearth. A servant hands you warm water to wash your face, and it feels less like a refreshing start and more like a reminder that indoor plumbing won't exist for another millennium. Another helper combs your hair with a wooden comb that snags every 5 seconds, giving you the first, involuntary ASMR of the morning. You notice your crown, or what passes for one. Early medieval rulers didn't wear rigid metal circlets most of the time. Instead, you might slip on a soft band or a simple gold fillet, something you could actually travel with without sounding like a walking bell tower. Real gem-studded crowns were kept locked away for big events, guarded by people who only pretended not to panic about losing them. The quirky detail of the morning arrives when your chamberlain presents the royal candle. According to some chronicles, certain kings had lucky candles, believed to burn in a way that reflected divine favor. If the flame flickered strangely, people took it as a sign from heaven. If it went out entirely, someone somewhere definitely blamed the kitchen staff. Historians still argue whether rulers truly believed these omens or simply pretended to. The medieval equivalent of nodding politely when your astrology enthusiast friend tells you Mercury is moonwalking again. You move toward the hall, stepping over uneven planks polished by 100 years of boots. You could trip, but royal dignity forbids it, so you glide with the stiff determination of someone who absolutely refuses to be meme-worthy in the 10th century. The great hall is dim but waking. Servants are lighting torches along the walls, their sparks drifting like tiny fireflies. The hearth at the center sends up a lazy column of smoke that doesn't quite figure out where the roof's vent is. You inhale the scent of burning oak, damp wool, and a faint note of porridge boiling somewhere nearby. Congratulations, you've just smelled the entire Middle Ages. A long wooden table stretches before you, already surrounded by retainers who are trying desperately to look lively. They rise the moment you enter. Everyone stands until you sit. One man bows so deeply he seems in danger of folding in half. Another is still rubbing sleep from his eyes, hoping you didn't notice. Someone whispers news from the edges of the realm. Maybe a neighboring lord is stirring trouble. Maybe someone spotted a comet, which everyone interprets as a cosmic opinion piece. Maybe a messenger brings tidings about an outlaw who stole 3 sheep and is now considered a folk hero by at least 4 villages. You sip warm ale, yes, warm, and try to decide which problem is the least annoying to deal with before lunch. The hall never fully quiets. Children chatter, dogs thump their tails. Someone drops a bucket in the corner and receives 17 side-eye glances. This is royal authority in its raw form. Not serene, not glamorous, but bustling, communal, noisy, and always faintly smoky. You take a breath. You feel the weight of the morning crown. You listen to the crackling fire. And you sense, not in a mystical way, but in a very practical one, that ruling this world begins long before you step into any throne room. It begins right here, in the candle-lit dawn, with people watching your every move, waiting for a sign of strength, mercy, or at least enough energy to make it through another day. You exhale, settling into the rhythm of 1,000 years of medieval royalty. You ease forward from that smoky dawn into the part of royal life nobody warns you about. The constant, exhausting sensation of being observed. It doesn't matter that you've barely finished washing your face, or that your hair still has that medieval pillow texture. Every corridor you walk down already has eyes in it. Nobles, attendants, clerics, distant cousins who refuse to leave. They all track you with the polite intensity of someone trying to pretend they're not judging your posture. You take a seat near the hearth, trying to look casual, but royalty doesn't really get to be casual. Even the way you sit is a kind of public statement. Too relaxed and you look weak, too upright and you look constipated. You try to find a middle ground, a confident slump, maybe, but you quickly abandon that idea because the steward is already squinting like he's calculating its political implications. A mainstream historical fact slips in here. Medieval monarchs were observed more closely than almost any other figures in society, and their public performance mattered just as much as their private decisions. Chroniclers wrote down everything. Ambassadors reported on your tone of voice. Household servants whispered about how long you took to answer a question at breakfast. Your entire reputation could wobble if you sneezed weirdly during a feast. To make it worse, the royal household is basically a medieval surveillance hub. But instead of cameras, you get human beings carrying trays and pretending they aren't eavesdropping. They glide past with the kind of smooth, trained steps that say, "I'm just here to refill your cup," while their ears vacuum up every scrap of conversation. And if you think that's paranoia talking, well, you're right. But medieval royalty had to be paranoid. One quirky detail that survives in records is that some kings refused to speak important sentences inside any room with tapestries because they believed the woven threads stored words. Early medieval acoustics weren't exactly Dolby certified, but the anxiety was real. You, too, glance at the nearest wall hanging and suddenly feel like it's paying suspiciously close attention. A line of courtiers forms, all of them practicing their best humble but ambitious expressions. You know, half of them want something, a quarter of them want someone removed from something, and the remaining quarter simply want to be seen near you because it boosts their social ranking like a medieval LinkedIn endorsement. Your personal chaplain leans in to murmur a greeting, and you realize he is now your earliest daily reminder that the church is listening. This man could report on your mood to bishops before lunchtime. Even your eyebrows aren't private. Raise them too sharply, and someone will later describe you as troubled in spirit. Lower them too far, and someone else will say you appear laden with secret knowledge. You can't win. Historians still argue whether medieval rulers actually believed they were always being spiritually judged, or whether they simply understood that earthly gossip traveled faster than divine lightning. A servant pours more ale, and you catch him staring a millisecond too long. Not in a romantic way, he's just trying to memorize your demeanor so he can recount it accurately to the kitchen staff, who will then share it with the stable boys, who will then share it with the nobles' attendants, and suddenly there will be a rumor by sundown that you're planning something momentous. All because you looked slightly pensive while sipping ale. You step toward the open hall doors. A gust of cold air rushes in, carrying the muffled sounds of the outer court, hooves clattering, chickens objecting loudly to their own existence, and the low chatter of servants sweeping after people who refuse to wipe their shoes. Every person you pass bows or curtsies, but they also stare, sometimes openly, sometimes from the corner of their eye, always with a healthy side of speculation. And it's not just the big actions, it's the tiny ones. How you nod, how long you pause, how warmly you greet a specific noble, how quickly you dismiss another. These micro-gestures ripple across the realm like very slow, very medieval Wi-Fi signals. Someone hundreds of miles away might soon receive a horseback-delivered report of your morning expression, evaluate it, discuss it, and offer an opinion that will arrive back to you in the form of political consequences. You try to grab a moment of quiet in the solar, a room with a few precious windows and a chair designed by someone who clearly forgot humans have spines. But even here, people hover. A lady in waiting, arranging fabrics, a page boy, dusting something that definitely does not need dusting. A clerk who acts surprised to see you even though he absolutely planned his entrance for maximum accidental encounter. You breathe out slowly, embracing the sleepy cadence that comes with royal monotony. Then, because the universe enjoys timing, a messenger bursts in, kneels dramatically, and hands you a sealed note. The room leans in without leaning in. They want to know whether your face softens or tightens, whether your eyes widen, whether you sigh, smile, or twitch. You try not to do anything, which technically counts as doing something, so that's also interpreted. You open the letter. It's trivial, something about sheep. It's always something about sheep, but you school your features into the perfect expression of regal neutrality, because every blink you make today becomes someone else's anecdote tomorrow. By midday, you've realized the truth. Ruling a medieval kingdom is 30% decision-making, 70% being observed while pretending those decisions don't rely heavily on your current nap deficit. 1,000 years of royalty, and privacy is still a fantasy. You drift from that solar still warm with other people's stares toward the part of royal life everyone thinks is glamorous, but almost never is. Meals. More specifically, the awkward stretch between breakfast and the noon feast, where you're somehow both hungry and dreading what the cooks will serve. Medieval cuisine is like a lottery where every dish contains either too much spice, not enough spice, or a surprise ingredient that makes you question the chef's worldview. You settle onto the carved wooden chair at the high table, which looks impressive but feels like sitting on a decorative plank. The morning light filters in through shutter slits, casting stripes across the hall. Servants hurry back and forth, bowls steaming in their hands. Everyone watches what you'll eat first, because even your menu is a political message. Too much meat and the monks complain. Too much fasting and the nobles start whispering that you're becoming weak. Too much anything and someone accuses you of excess yes, even though you're literally the monarch. A mainstream historical fact slides in. Medieval royalty often ate far more simply in the morning than people imagine. Bread, cheese, ale, maybe cold meat or pottage, if the cooks felt ambitious. Breakfast wasn't a banquet. It was more like nutritional paperwork, a thing you had to get through before the real eating happened hours later. Today, your meal begins with a wooden bowl of porridge that has the personality of wet plaster. You take a spoonful. It tastes beige. That's not a flavor, but here we are. When the medieval chroniclers said kings lived richly, they clearly weren't referring to breakfast. A quirky detail emerges as a servant offers you something in a tiny clay bowl, pickled fish eyes, supposedly good for clarity of vision, and also for impressing foreign guests who are too polite to refuse. You do not have to eat them, but you do have to pretend they don't horrify you. You nod graciously, which the servant interprets as, place these directly in front of the monarch. Great. The hall hums softly. Dogs mill around your feet, hoping for crumbs. Pages stand in rigid lines along the walls, each trying to breathe as quietly as possible. Someone coughs. The cough echoes. You pretend not to hear it, in case reacting creates a rumor about your emotional stability. Then the steward approaches with the seriousness of a man bearing mystical wisdom. He presents your next item. Bread. But not just any bread, royal bread. Slightly whiter, slightly finer, and slightly less likely to contain the occasional stone fragment that gives peasants emergency dental problems. Historians still argue whether the finest bread really tasted better, or whether the importance attached to it made people pretend it tasted better. Either way, you tear a piece off, and it tastes like bread. Congratulations, you are living history. You sip from your cup warm ale again, because medieval mornings have a flair for consistency. If you're lucky, there's a drop of honey in it. If you're less lucky, there's a hint of yesterday's cup washer, forgetting to actually wash the cup. While you eat, the nobles edge closer. They do it politely, casually, as though drifting nearer is simply gravity's idea. They want to chat during breakfast, because nothing says stable governance like discussing territorial disputes between bites of porridge. You listen patiently as a baron launches into a story involving grazing rights, a stubborn mule, and a neighbor accused of provocative fence placement. You nod thoughtfully while chewing, trying not to inhale crumbs while pretending this conversation matters more than your first nap of the day. The morning continues with the slow choreography of royal dining. Every gesture you make, a raised eyebrow, a half smile. The way you place your spoon gets absorbed by the watching crowd. Medieval royalty is interpretive dance in slow motion, and the audience is always ready to critique the performance. A platter of cured meats arrives next. Some slices look delicious, others look like they might gain sentience if left unattended. You choose carefully, because the wrong piece could be too salty, too chewy, or too medieval for your modern sensibilities. Still, the feast hall watches, waiting to emulate your choice as though you're influencing the era's earliest food trends. The conversation shifts to gossip, because of course it does. Someone mentions that a distant duke's niece has reportedly been seen training a falcon to steal pastries. You smile politely. Is this true? Possibly. Is it important? Absolutely not. Will it be discussed for the next 3 weeks? Without question. You remember that even during meals, your behavior sets precedents. 1,000 years of royalty is built on tiny choices, magnified by countless observers. You could, theoretically, eat in total silence, but that would spark speculation that you're planning something monumental. So you throw in a light comment about the weather, hoping to redirect the room into safer conversation territory. It works, almost. A noble immediately begins a long and dramatic monologue about last winter's frost and how it personally wronged him. You nod sympathetically, spooning more beige porridge into your mouth while wondering if other monarchs felt this level of emotional hostage-taking before noon. Breakfast finally tapers off. Servants collect bowls with swift, practiced motions. The hall grows louder as people exhale, stretch, and begin their own daily routines. You stand slowly, regally, because if you stand too fast, someone will say you seemed eager, and if you stand too slowly, someone else will claim you appeared weary. You exit the high table with the gentle confidence of someone who just survived porridge politics and lived to tell the tale. The morning may have been simple, but you learned something important. Even the quietest royal moment is never truly quiet. Not when every crumb you choose or refuse becomes part of a 1,000-year tapestry woven from observation, interpretation, and very questionable breakfast choices. You leave the hall with the faint taste of porridge still haunting you, only to face the next royal obstacle of the day: getting dressed. Now, before you imagine silks flowing gracefully and attendants fluttering around you like helpful butterflies, let's reset expectations. Medieval royal clothing is less glamorous fashion statement and more portable treasury strapped onto your body with optimism. A small army of attendants waits in your chamber, each holding a different layer of garments. You already know this will take longer than breakfast, which is saying something. They keep their expressions neutral, but you catch the subtle tension in their shoulders. Dressing the monarch is a ceremony in itself, part artistry, part politics, part desperately praying nothing gets torn. A mainstream historical fact glides in like a neatly folded tunic. Royal garments were intentionally heavy, embroidered with metals, stitched with pearls, and woven with imported dyes that screamed wealth to anyone within a 5-mile radius. These clothes weren't just outfits, they were proclamations. You were dressing not to stay warm or comfortable, but to wordlessly declare, yes, I am in charge. Yes, this outfit could pay for your village. Your attendants begin with the undertunic, a simple linen layer soft enough to prevent your outer garments from feeling like sandpaper. Linen breathes, which is helpful, because nearly everything that goes on top of it absolutely does not. Then comes the wool, dyed in a shade only royalty can afford. Reds, purples, deep blues colors brewed from plants, insects, and minerals that required entire fields, entire workshops, entire economies. You feel the fabric settle onto your shoulders like a warm, expensive yoke. It's cozy for now. Give it 20 minutes, and you'll be sweating like a blacksmith in July. A quirky detail pops up when your wardrobe master presents a thin golden chain meant to rest across your chest. Some rulers wore these not as jewelry, but as virtue chains, symbols meant to show moral restraint. Ironically, several of those rulers were known for doing the exact opposite of moral restraining, which proves that medieval accessories functioned very much like modern PR strategies. Historians still argue whether such chains actually influenced behavior or were just flashy reminders that noble etiquette required effort. Either way, you clasp it on, hoping it doesn't dig into your collarbone the moment you sit down. Next, Belts. Belts with metalwork. Belts with gems. Belts that could double as blunt weapons in an emergency. Each one tightened just enough to look regal, just loose enough to stop you from fainting. Royal fashion is all about equilibrium. You glance at a shimmering cloak nearby. The thing weighs as much as a fully grown cat. Maybe two. Its embroidery catches the candlelight like molten sunlight. You want to skip it, there's absolutely no reason to wear a half tapestry indoors, but skipping it would imply informality, which would imply vulnerability, which would imply weakness, which would circulate faster than warm ale at a feast. And so the cloak is draped over your shoulders. You immediately feel the gravitational pull. The attendants step back to examine you. They circle like artists admiring their work, adjusting folds, smoothing seams, tugging here, pinching there. Royal garments don't hang naturally. They must be sculpted into place, like draped armor. You catch your reflection, or the closest thing the medieval world offers, a polished metal plate. It warps your face slightly, but the garments still shine. You do look like royalty. A stiff, overly warm, carefully arranged piece of royalty, but royalty nonetheless. Then comes the headgear. Crowns are only for ceremonies, but circlets, fillets, caps, or coifs are fair game. Today, your chamberlain presents a narrow band of gold, delicately engraved, lightweight, relatively. Speaking, though, light is a subjective term when everything else you're wearing already adds up to several kilos. He places it on your head with the delicacy of someone handling a newborn goat. Too far back and you look unserious. Too far forward and you look like you have a headache. It must be just right, because political stability apparently rests upon forehead geometry. Another attendant adds rings to your fingers, thick, cold, and weighty. You flex your hands, they clink. If modern fashion designers saw this, they would call it maximalist. Medieval people would simply call it Tuesday. Finally, everything is in place. You are dressed. You are layered like a ceremonial lasagna. You are a walking statement of power, wealth, and prestige. And you are also extremely warm. A bead of sweat threatens to form at your temple, but you hold steady, because if you sweat, someone might interpret it as fear, or stress, or worse, overexertion, and so you remain perfectly composed, radiating the calm of someone who absolutely is not wondering if you can safely remove one layer without causing a diplomatic incident. You step toward the door in your full regalia. The attendants part. The nobles waiting outside inhale softly just enough for you to register their awe. The effect works. These garments, as ridiculous as they feel, broadcast authority the same way a beacon broadcasts light. You walk forward, feeling the gentle swing of the heavy cloak behind you. You're dressed like a portable treasury, stitched into layers of history's most symbolic fabrics, and as you glide into the corridors, you sense the shift in everyone's posture. Whatever you were an hour ago, sleepy, chilly, porridge-surviving royalty, now you are the monarch in full form. And everyone sees it. You glide down the corridor in your layered, shimmering, slightly overheated outfit, and you already feel the invisible energy of the next battlefield. Etiquette, court etiquette, isn't just rules, it's an ecosystem, a social labyrinth, a 1,000-year obstacle course designed by people who clearly had too much free time and a deep emotional investment in bowing angles. The moment you enter the audience hall, everything changes. Conversations snap quieter, postures straighten, people rearrange their limbs into their most flattering configurations. You swear someone even adjusts the angle of his own shadow. Court life is basically a continuous audition where the judges are everyone else in the room. A mainstream historical fact drifts in wearing a formal tunic. Medieval court etiquette wasn't just about manners. It was about demonstrating loyalty, hierarchy, and political awareness. The right gesture could secure alliances. The wrong gesture could spark feuds that lasted generations. You take a few careful steps inside, and the entire chamber watches to see whether your stride matches the weight of your rank. A noblewoman steps forward to greet you, dipping into a curtsy so precise it looks like she practiced it in front of a mirror for 3 hours. She probably did. You nod not too deeply, that would imply equality. Not too shallowly, that would imply disdain. Just the perfect, measured royal dip. Even your neck muscles have to do politics here. Then, your master of ceremonies approaches, holding a staff of office that doubles as a reminder not to improvise. He murmurs, "My liege, Lord Aldrich wishes to be acknowledged first. You glance at Lord Aldrich, tall, bearded, wearing a tunic embroidered with what looks like every animal he's ever hunted. He's sweating lightly, possibly from the effort of pretending not to care about bow order. Behind him, Lady Soria glares with the ferocity of a starved hawk. She thought she would be greeted first. You are already in trouble. A quirky detail surfaces from the depths of historical weirdness. Some courts kept official etiquette books so dense and complicated that even the monarch got confused. One such book reportedly included rules for appropriate smiling, specifying when teeth were allowed and when they were not. Imagine living in a world where your grin is a diplomatic weapon. Historians still argue whether these books were widely followed or just aspirational fantasies written by overzealous clerks who dreamed of a perfectly organized universe. Either way, you do your best to follow the general principles. Greet Lord Aldrich first, maintain hierarchical order, and pray no one faints out of jealousy. Lord Aldrich bows so deeply his beard nearly brushes the tiles. Your Majesty, he rumbles, voice heavy with pride. You nod graciously, then seamlessly greet Lady Osoria with equal dignity. She softens, though she still looks like she'd happily duel someone behind the stables to reclaim precedence. A dozen nobles line up next, each greeting requiring a slightly different angle of the head, tilt of the hand, or measured phrase. You accidentally give a minor baroness a nod that's half a millimeter too polite. Her eyes widen with triumph. She will dine out on that moment for 6 months. Congratulations, you have accidentally elevated someone's social standing with the power of your cervical vertebrae. The hall shifts as attendants move through it carrying trays of spiced wine and wafers. People mingle, but always in a choreographed way. No one approaches you without permission. No one retreats without acknowledgement. No one laughs too loudly, unless you're already smiling. You can almost see the tension shimmering in the air like heat above a forge. You take a step toward a group of ambassadors. 3 of them straighten so quickly you hear fabric crackle. Diplomatic etiquette is a separate beast, more rigid, more coded, more likely to get someone beheaded if misinterpreted. One ambassador bows lower than protocol requires, which is either a profound compliment or a calculated trap. Another bows too, shallowly, which is either an insult or a cultural misunderstanding. Fantastic. You respond with the practiced neutrality of someone diffusing a medieval version of international email tone misunderstandings. A jester appears at your side, performing a small flourish with his cap. Court jesters were one of the few people allowed to break etiquette rules, mostly because they were expected to. He offers you a joke about a donkey, a bishop, and a barrel of apples. You smile politely. The joke isn't funny, but laughing too loudly would imply favoritism toward the jester, which would annoy the musicians, which would annoy the steward, which would annoy everyone else, because apparently the steward is weirdly influential. Every gesture has weight here. Someone drops a goblet across the room. It clatters loudly, echoing like a gong. In any other setting, people would chuckle, shrug, or keep talking. At court, however, it creates a wave of performed concern. Half the room turns to judge the goblet dropper's social future. You pretend not to notice, which is the safest option. Your master of ceremonies leans forward again, whispering, "Remember, sire, the Duchess of Elamir expects a compliment about her new embroidered sleeves." You glance at her sleeves. They look like 2 extremely fancy curtains. But etiquette demands the compliment. You say something diplomatic. Exquisite craftsmanship. She beams. Crisis averted. Then come the petitions. People approach you with the desperate politeness of those who need something, but fear asking for too much. A man bows and requests that his son be granted a modest tract of land. You nod thoughtfully. Another noble asks you to settle a dispute about hunting rights. Someone else requests permission to marry someone who absolutely does not want to marry them. And all of it must be answered gracefully, carefully, and with the tone of someone who definitely didn't just sweat through 3 layers of wool. Behind you, 2 lords begin a quiet argument about who ranks higher in the seating chart for tomorrow's feast. You sigh internally. That seating chart has already caused more diplomatic strain than last year's border conflict. You maintain your regal expression. Etiquette may be exhausting, but it's the backbone of medieval authority. Every rule, every bow, every nod reinforces the delicate web that keeps noble egos in check and keeps the realm balanced. Finally, the session loosens. People drift back into comfortable clusters. The air warms with polite chatter. You breathe deeply and prepare to leave the hall. As you step away, attendants trail behind you, adjusting your cloak and whispering updates. You feel the weight of etiquette slipping off just a little as you exit the formal sphere. But the truth remains. In medieval royalty, a single misplaced bow could spark a feud, elevate a rival, or rewrite a family's destiny. And you just survived an entire morning of it. You retreat from SAP, the audience hall, with the stiff, polite smile of someone who has just survived 90 minutes of strategic bowing. But you're not done, not even close, because now you're drifting toward one of the most intimate and politically charged arenas in all of medieval royalty, the royal bedchamber. And let's be clear, this is not a romantic sanctuary. This is a room engineered for diplomacy, suspicion, alliances, airs, gossip, and the delicate art of pretending the heavy curtains block sound when they absolutely do not. You enter the chamber, and before you can even breathe, 2 attendants slip in behind you. They move with the quiet efficiency of professional lurkers, checking your bedding, adjusting the braziers, scanning the room for anything out of place. Privacy is a luxury the medieval world hasn't invented yet. Your personal space is more theory than reality. A mainstream historical fact settles beside the canopy bed. Royal bedchambers were semi-public spaces, often used for small councils, private audiences, and diplomatic conversations. People came and went throughout the day. Servants slept nearby. Guards stood just outside. Your bed might be the grandest piece of furniture in the kingdom, but it also doubled as a meeting table when necessary. And that massive bed, it creaks, loudly, which is unfortunate, because every sound in here tends to migrate toward the gossip channels faster than a messenger on a fresh horse. You step toward the bed and brush your hand across the embroidered covers. The fabric feels soft, warm, expensive. You'd think this would be the one peaceful refuge in your life. Instead, it's a stage where politics wears pajamas. Your spouse enters, or perhaps your betrothed, or perhaps the person you're politically required to bond with, even if the two of you share all the chemistry of 2 wet socks. They greet you with a smile that's polite, strained, and entirely aware of the dozen implications behind every word you might say next. Marriage in medieval royalty is basically an alliance with occasional small talk. A quirky historical tidbit dances in. Some royal couples had witnesses present at their wedding night rituals, not because people were nosy, though they absolutely were, but because producing heirs was considered a matter of state. And yes, sometimes those witnesses were priests, relatives, or chamberlains trying very hard to stare at the wall, neither romantic nor relaxing. Historians still argue whether these witness accounts were literal observations or symbolic rituals exaggerated by later chroniclers with too much imagination and too few hobbies. Either way, you glance at the heavy curtains, the ones designed to preserve a tiny shred of privacy. They're thick, luxurious, and decorated with scenes so detailed you're sure the artist must have been paid in wine. But despite their elegance, they muffle sound about as effectively as a damp napkin. From somewhere outside, you hear footsteps. Clerks discussing parchments, guards shifting armor, a maid humming as she carries a bucket of water. Every noise drifts inward. Your private life is never fully yours. Your spouse sits beside you, smoothing the bedspread. There's warmth there, a gentle moment between 2 overworked monarchs, but also tension, because the realm expects heirs, and heirs require cooperation. The unspoken pressure hangs over the bed like a low fog. You attempt a joke to break the heaviness, something light, something about wishing medieval herbal tea worked as well for nerves as the apothecaries claim. Your spouse chuckles politely. Humor helps, but not much. A servant enters with steaming lavender water, bowing deeply before placing it on the table. She lingers a fraction too long because part of her job is to observe, to notice, to report. Not maliciously, just dutifully. This is how royal households function. You sip the lavender water. It tastes like warm relaxation mixed with the distinct aftertaste of social expectation. A knock follows. A chamberlain slips in to remind you of a scheduling change. Some noble wants your attention later. You nod, and he glides out. This is normal. Even in the bedchamber, even in the quiet moments, business never truly stops. You lean back, letting the heavy fabrics cradle you. The warmth of the braziers slowly spreads, but the air still carries a draft. Medieval architecture has yet to master insulation. The cold clings to the corners like a permanent resident. Your spouse asks how your morning went, You give the shortened, polite version. You do not mention the accidental half-millimeter overbow incident. Some things are too painful to relive. The two of you speak softly about the afternoon's plans, visiting the garden, reviewing petitions, maybe even stealing 10 minutes to breathe. In a life built from ceremonies and obligations, these tiny pockets of normalcy feel precious. Then, as you finally relax, you hear footsteps again, this time slower, deliberate. The captain of the guard appears in the doorway, bows, and announces nighttime precautions. You nod. You know the drill. Extra guards at the stairs. Torches checked. Locks secured. Poison tasters on standby. The truth is unavoidable. Medieval rulers sleep lightly, always, even in the safety of their own chambers. Especially there. You exhale, letting your shoulders soften. You're not alone, never truly. But for a brief moment, you feel a calm settle in. The flicker of firelight warms the bed. The curtains sway just slightly. Your spouse's presence beside you is steady and grounding. And despite the lack of privacy, despite the scrutiny, despite the politics woven into every thread of your bedding, you realize there is a certain comfort in the gentle rituals of the royal chamber. Here, in this fragile quiet, you're not just a monarch. You're a human being trying to rest in a world that never stops watching. You leave the bedchamber with a steadier breath, only to step directly into a reality medieval royalty handled with varying degrees of panic, ruling when the monarch is barely tall enough to reach the table. Because now, drifting through centuries of royal tradition, you find yourself experiencing the world as a child ruler, one of history's most awkward, precarious, and strangely common situations. The corridor feels taller. The tapestries loom larger. Every adult bends slightly at the waist when speaking to you, not out of respect, but out of the universal instinct to address someone whose feet might still dangle from a chair. You walk forward anyway, chin raised, shoulders set, because child monarchs don't get the luxury of growing up first. They inherit, ready or not. A mainstream historical fact settles in beside you like a stern tutor. Child rulers were normal in medieval Europe, and regents, usually ambitious relatives, often wielded real power until the monarch came of age. Sometimes these regents were loyal. Sometimes they were scheming. Sometimes they were both before breakfast. Your regent stands nearby now, smiling with the serene confidence of someone who enjoys holding authority that technically is not theirs. His robes swirl dramatically as he escorts you toward the council chamber, where a collection of extremely serious adults wait to discuss matters they're sure you won't understand. You enter the room. Half the council members rise, the other half forget, then rise too late and pretend the delay was intentional. Already, political tension simmers, because in the presence of a child monarch, adults must perform respect, while also quietly strategizing how to shape, influence, or outmaneuver you. You take your seat, your feet indeed do not reach the floor, and straighten your back. One of the councillors gives you a sympathetic smile, the kind adults give when they think you aren't ready to sign decrees. Another one studies you like a prize he intends to claim. You grip the armrests, your small fingers tightening around polished wood. A clerk clears his throat and begins reading petitions aloud. Each sentence is long enough to serve as its own winter. You do your best to appear thoughtful, but you're distracted by the ink stain on his sleeve, shaped exactly like a lopsided chicken. This is not helpful. Your regent answers questions on your behalf. He speaks smoothly, confidently, and with just enough flourish to show he's really enjoying himself. You nod occasionally, which everyone interprets as regal agreement, even though sometimes you're just fighting a sneeze. A quirky historical detail pops up like an eager page. Some child monarchs were trained using miniature thrones, tiny scepters, and practice crowns made from lighter materials so they wouldn't topple over. Imagine the royal equivalent of training wheels. Except, instead of learning to ride a bike, you're learning to rule vast territories, while also mastering long division. Historians still argue whether child monarchs understood their symbolic power or whether they simply mimicked the adults around them. You sit there now, trying to look wise beyond your years, but also wishing intensely for a snack. The council moves on to disputes. A border squabble, a merchant feud, a cathedral needing funds. Adults drone in steady monotone, occasionally pausing to look at you as if expecting miraculous insights. You offer a measured nod. The room murmurs approvingly, clearly impressed by your contemplative silence. If only they knew you were thinking about whether your puppy is being fed on schedule. Outside the chamber, you hear the faint laughter of other children playing in the courtyard. Their shouts echo faintly through the stone walls, tugging at something deep and wistful inside you. They run freely, they scrape knees, they chase geese and get scolded. Meanwhile, you sit on a throne-like chair contemplating taxation while wearing clothes so fancy they make it nearly impossible to climb anything fun. Your regent dismisses the council with a flourish, and the adults file out, bowing in your direction. Some of them bow with extra enthusiasm, hoping to secure favor. Others bow minimally, signaling quiet resentment. You recognize the difference, child you may be, but royal observation skills develop early out of sheer survival instinct. Once alone with your tutors, the day shifts into lessons. Medieval royal education is a strange mixture of subjects: scripture, genealogy, warfare, etiquette, and languages you'll probably never use, but must know anyway, because someone in the future will expect you to read a treaty written in Latin at age 12. Your tutor drones on about the importance of remembering all your ancestors back to a man named something like Aldfrith, the extremely bearded. You nod solemnly, though the only thing you'll retain is that Aldfrith could probably hold a bird in his beard. You practice signing your name. The quill is oversized compared to your hand. Ink splatters. A dot lands on your sleeve, and your tutor gently reminds you that Majesty must cultivate careful hands. You resist the urge to stick your tongue out. Even meals are different for a child monarch. You eat surrounded by adults who speak in formal tones, pass dishes with ceremony, and pretend not to flinch when you spill gravy on a priceless tapestry. A servant sweeps it up immediately, wearing the expression of someone who is deeply familiar with Child King messes. Later, in the quiet of the private chamber, your nurse approaches with a soft cloak. Her presence is warm, familiar. She was there before the crown, and will probably be there long after various regents try and fail to fully shape your destiny. She adjusts your collar, fussing even as the crown tilts slightly on your head. It is in these small moments that the weight of royalty feels heaviest, when you realize your childhood exists only in fragments, tucked between meetings and expectations. When you understand that everyone around you treats you as both precious and perilous. When you feel that a single misstep could shift the realm, not because you understand politics, but because others do. As you lie down that night, blankets tucked tightly around you, candlelight flickering on the carved beams overhead, you sense the paradox of it all. You are the center of the kingdom, and yet controlled by almost everyone within it. Being a child monarch means growing up fast, acting steady, watching everything, and pretending you're not scared even when the crown feels bigger than your entire body. You rise the next morning still carrying the strange weight of childhood crowns and echoing council chambers. But today, as the centuries shift around you, royalty shows you a different side of itself. A softer, stranger, more delightfully unhinged side. The world of royal pets, obsessions, and the kinds of hobbies that make you wonder whether some monarchs just needed more supervised activities. You step into a sunlit cloister garden where the air smells faintly of rosemary and damp stone, and immediately, something furry barrels toward you. A massive dog somewhere between a wolfhound and a moving carpet skids to a stop at your feet. He looks up, tail wagging with medieval enthusiasm, which is exactly like modern enthusiasm, but muddier. You scratch behind his ears. His fur feels like thick wool dipped in rainwater. Charming. A mainstream historical fact trots in happily. Medieval royalty kept animals not only as companions, but as political symbols. Hunting dogs to prove martial skill, falcons to demonstrate prestige, horses bred as carefully as royal heirs, monkeys, lions, exotic birds. If a creature could be transported in a wooden crate and fed without maiming too many handlers, some monarch owned it. Today, strolling through the palace grounds, you meet a small parade of royal creatures. First, the falconer bows and presents your favorite peregrine, the one with sharp amber eyes and an attitude problem. She clicks her beak imperiously, clearly aware she outranks several minor nobles. Then come the peacocks. They strut near the hedges, shimmering like walking stained glass windows, occasionally screaming with the chaotic energy of a goddess stubbing her toe. You nod politely at them. They nod back or glare. It's hard to tell with peacocks. A quirky detail flaps its wings into the narrative. One medieval ruler reportedly kept a pet swan that attended formal banquets, wearing a tiny, jeweled collar. The swan was treated as a guest, not a dish, which is probably for the best, since swans have the temperament of angry librarians with personal vendettas. Historians still argue whether this particular swan genuinely bowed to guests or was simply lowering its head menacingly, as swans do when they're deciding whom to bite. You stroll toward the menagerie, a collection of cages, enclosures, and stone shelters built to house the kingdom's most bizarre conversation pieces. Foreign ambassadors often brought exotic animals as diplomatic gifts. Some rulers received elephants, others, leopards. One particularly unlucky king got a bear who discovered how to open doors. That went about as well as you expect. Today, you approach a cage containing a sleek lynx with tufted ears and eyes that calculate whether you're edible. You take a respectful step back. The keeper beams proudly. "A gift from the mountain tribes," he says, as though that explains why you suddenly feel very mortal. Further down the path, children of the court cluster around a goat wearing a decorative collar. The goat ignores them, chewing stoically on the palace herb garden. You overhear one child say, "This is the steward's goat," which tracks perfectly with your knowledge of stewards. Organized, anxious, and definitely the type to own a goat wearing a schedule. But pets are only half the story. Royals also collected things, strange things, obsessive things. You enter a side chamber filled with shelves, and immediately you understand why royals sometimes scared their courtiers. The shelves overflow with curiosities: minerals, polished stones, antlers, bones, relics, carved charms, rare feathers, shells that made their way inland through trade networks. You pick up a small, spiral shell, soft white, smooth as worn marble. It smells faintly like old salt. Whoever collected these clearly found comfort in gathering little worlds from faraway edges of the map. Your steward clears his throat gently behind you. "Sire, your grandfather believed this shell granted wisdom." You nod, placing it back carefully. In the medieval world, everything could have meaning: objects, animals, natural oddities. Wonder and superstition were close siblings. Another display catches your eye: a collection of carved wooden figurines, knights, saints, beasts, and something that looks suspiciously like a potato with wings. You pick it up. The steward hesitates, then confesses, "We don't actually know what that one is." Excellent. History's mysteries remain intact. Next, he leads you to an adjoining room, the aviary. Wings flutter, feathers drift. Exotic birds, macaws, perhaps, or their medieval cousins perch along wooden bars. Their colors blaze even in dim torchlight. They watch you with sharp intelligence. One whistles, another mimics a cough with alarming accuracy. Royal aviaries weren't just decoration. They were status, wealth, diplomacy. A way to show the world that your kingdom was connected to places beyond its borders. You lift your arm, and a trained falcon hops lightly onto your padded wrist. Her talons grip firmly, but not painfully. She tilts her head, studying you with regal confidence. Fair enough, between the two of you, she's probably seen more drama. As you exit the aviary, a commotion erupts near the courtyard fountain. Two courtiers sprint past, shouting something about the mongoose again. You pause, blinking. A mongoose? In a royal palace? You follow the noise and discover a small, fierce creature making a heroic attempt to steal a loaf of bread twice its size. The baker flaps a cloth at it. The mongoose flattens its ears and hisses with the ferocity of a creature who refuses to negotiate with mere pastry artisans. Apparently, someone received this mongoose as a diplomatic gift. Now, it lives in the palace, causing low-grade chaos and doing a great job of making the cats nervous. You watch as the little creature darts away triumphantly with the stolen bread. You respect its hustle. Back in the main garden, the great hound from earlier returns and drops a stick at your feet. You throw it. He charges after it with princely determination. Several nobles gasp, because apparently even casual dog interaction must be scrutinized for symbolic meaning. You ignore them. Throwing the stick again would cause a minor etiquette scandal, so you resist. But you smile, because in the middle of royal rigidity, the animals provide something refreshingly simple: presence without judgment. Well, mostly without judgment. You glance at the peacocks, who appear to be judging everything. You kneel to scratch the hound again, feeling a rare, comforting warmth settle inside your heavy cloak. Pets, collections, animals, they remind you that royalty, for all its ceremony, still shares the same human instinct to find companionship in the creatures around us. Even if those creatures sometimes steal bread, scream like banshees, or require entire architectural additions to house them. Here in the menagerie's soft chaos, you find something medieval royalty rarely gets, a moment that is real, unguarded, and alive. You leave the menagerie with feathers still drifting in your peripheral vision and the faint sensation that one peacock is still judging you from a distance. But as the palace corridors narrow and darken, the entire atmosphere shifts. The playful chaos of animals fades, replaced by the deep, steady hum of something older, heavier, and impossibly influential: the church. You feel it before you see it, the scent of beeswax candles, the echo of chanting drifting faintly through the stone, the cool stillness that settles over the air like folded velvet. Your footsteps soften instinctively. Medieval royalty may command armies, lands, and courts, but in these halls, power belongs to someone else. A mainstream historical fact enters with quiet authority. The medieval church held enormous sway over royal life, shaping politics, marriages, diplomacy, law, and even the daily rhythm of a monarch's schedule. From crownings to funerals, from treaties to bedchamber rituals, the church wove itself through every thread of royal experience. You step into the palace chapel. Light spills through narrow stained glass slits, coloring the floor in soft reds and blues. A priest bows deeply as you enter. Behind him, a small group of monks chant morning prayers, their voices soft but steady, rising like the hum of bees in summer. Their chant follows a rhythm that feels ancient, older than the stones around you. The notes vibrate gently in your chest. Even if you don't understand every Latin phrase, the cadence is hypnotic, almost sleepy. If you weren't a monarch trying to look spiritually engaged, your personal confessor approaches, bowing with serene confidence. He's one of the most influential men in your orbit, a figure who hears your secrets, your doubts, your internal contradictions, and occasionally the political plans you'd rather not say too loudly in front of tapestries that absorb words. He gestures for you to sit. You lower yourself into a carved wooden chair that creaks dramatically, as though announcing your sins before you speak them. Very helpful. Your Majesty, he murmurs, shall we review today's spiritual obligations? You nod, though part of you wonders whether monarchy should come with a daily syllabus. He begins listing feast days, fast days, saints' observances, required masses, expected almsgiving, and mildly ominous reminders about charity. It sounds less like spiritual guidance and more like medieval homework. A quirky detail wanders in wearing a cassock. Some medieval rulers collected relics so aggressively that their treasuries looked like spiritual museums: bones, cloth scraps, vials of oil, even entire body parts of saints. These relics weren't just holy objects, they were political assets. Showing a rival your arm of street, whoever, was the medieval equivalent of showing off a new sports car. Your own chapel contains a few relics under glass: a fragment of a saint's garment, a tooth of a venerated hermit, and if rumour is to be believed, a feather from an angel's wing, though it looks suspiciously like swan fluff. You don't comment. Let faith have its mysteries. Historians still argue whether some monarchs genuinely believed every relic's origin, or whether they indulged the stories because relics boosted their legitimacy. Perhaps the truth is both, belief and practicality intertwined. You rise to light a candle. Its small flame flickers, trembling as though aware of the responsibility. Lighting candles is symbolic, an act of devotion, humility, and the universal hope that fire doesn't drip onto your expensive sleeves. You watch it steady itself, glow bright, and then lean subtly toward a draft that should not exist but always does. Just as you settle into a moment of quiet reflection, the bishop arrives. He enters with the gravity of a man who has memorized his own importance. Rings glitter on his fingers, his robes shimmer with gold thread. He bows, deeply but not too deeply. A bishop kneels only to God and kings, and sometimes he prefers to keep the distinction slightly vague. Your Majesty, he says, a matter of spiritual and political significance requires your attention. Of course it does. Matters of spiritual and political significance always arrive when you least want them. He explains that a neighbouring lord disputes the boundaries of his bishopric. The matter involves land, tithes, and a rumour about a miracle well that attracts pilgrims with coins. The church wants your intervention. The nobles will want the exact opposite. Congratulations, you're now in the middle of a medieval turf war disguised as piety. You listen politely. The bishop's tone is smooth, measured, calm like a man trying very hard not to look like he's manipulating you. You nod thoughtfully, though internally you're imagining what it would be like to spend just one day solving a problem that does not involve land, marriage, religion, or sheep. After he leaves, your chaplain guides you to a smaller devotional room. The walls here are painted with faded saints, their eyes large and solemn. One looks like he's judging your posture. Another looks like he wants to offer supportive life advice. You sit on a wooden stool that should be classified as a medieval torture device, its surface so stiff it encourages immediate repentance. The chaplain begins reading from scripture. His voice is calm, soothing, and warm enough to lull you into a contemplative trance. You allow your eyes to drift across the flickering candlelight and the quiet motion of dust motes floating like tiny golden spirits. As you reflect, you understand how deeply the church shapes your kingship. It defines your coronation. It legitimizes your authority. It writes your history. It warns you about sins you didn't know existed. It whispers advice, issues demands, and occasionally offers comfort. It is both your support and your leash. You rise slowly. The chapel's cool air follows you into the hallway. The priest bows again. The monks' chant fades behind stone walls. And you feel it, the unbroken presence of faith woven through royal life, sometimes as blessing, sometimes as burden. Here in the quiet corridors, you realize a truth medieval rulers spent centuries navigating. You may command armies, wealth, and earthly power, but the church commands belief. And belief, in this world, moves empires. You leave the chapel with the faint scent of incense still clinging to your cloak, stepping back into the palace where the air feels noticeably lighter and immediately thicker with politics. Because now comes one of the most delicate, ridiculous, and unintentionally comedic parts of medieval royalty. Diplomacy done not with blunt declarations, but with perfume, flattery, and the kind of sideways glances that could trigger a small war if misinterpreted. The corridor opens into the presence chamber, where ambassadors from several neighboring realms await. They stand in stiff clusters, each group pretending not to observe the others. It's like a school cafeteria, except everyone carries a knife and has an opinion about border treaties. You enter with controlled grace, your cloak trailing behind you like a colorful threat. Heads bow, hats lower. A few unsteady smiles flicker across faces. Diplomats aren't supposed to show nerves, but that rule tends to crumble when they're standing in a foreign palace staring at a monarch who may or may not decide to tax their trade caravans into oblivion. A mainstream historical fact slips neatly into the room. Medieval diplomacy relied heavily on symbolic gestures, gifts, greetings, tone, posture, and even how long you made someone wait before speaking to them. Prolonged waiting could signal dominance. Immediate reception could imply mutual respect. A handshake, or the medieval equivalent, could either cement alliances or start rumors that you favored one kingdom over another. Your master of ceremonies announces the first ambassador, Lord Veriton of the Western Marches. He approaches wearing robes, smelling faintly of imported perfumes, something floral, something expensive, something that's trying very hard to say, "Please don't conquer us." He bows low, offering an ornate silver box. "A token of friendship," he says. You open it to reveal crystallized fruit coated in gold leaf, both beautiful and profoundly confusing. You nod politely. Around the room, rival ambassadors narrow their eyes. They're all thinking the same thing. Why didn't we bring fancier fruit? Before you can taste anything, another delegation steps forward. This one offers you a bolt of rare Eastern silk, deep red, smooth as water, shimmering in the torchlight. You run your fingers across it. It's extraordinary. It's also a political minefield. Accept too eagerly, and you look desperate. Admire too long, and you might imply preference. You settle on the classic royal response. The pleased yet neutrally impressed smile. It's the same face you use when someone tells you about their dream involving a talking cow and you're trying to be supportive. A quirky historical detail sachets in wrapped in fancy fabrics. Some medieval rulers used scented oils to influence diplomatic encounters, believing the right aroma made them appear more divine, calm, or powerful. One king reportedly wore rose oil so heavily during negotiations that ambassadors described the experience as drowning in flowers. Another preferred myrrh, which made him smell like a well-decorated church. You're wearing a light trace of lavender and amber today, carefully chosen by your attendants because it conveys confidence without arrogance. You're not sure scent conveys all that, but it certainly smells better than the alternative, medieval sweat. Historians still argue whether these olfactory strategies had real psychological effects or were simply attempts to survive in crowded rooms where bathing customs were inconsistent. You motion for refreshments. Servants glide in with spiced wine, wafers, and early prototypes of diplomatic small-talk fuel. The ambassadors sip cautiously. Everyone pretends not to judge the flavor, though you notice one diplomat discreetly pressing his lips together after tasting the wine, clearly reconsidering every decision that led him here. And now comes the flattery. Ambassadors begin praising your realm, its beauty, its strength, its weather patterns. One man launches into a poetic description of your rivers so overly dramatic it sounds like he's wooing them. Another compliments your castle architecture, even though you know for a fact his country invented half the castle designs your builders copied. You respond with gracious modesty, which in royal terms means gently absorbing compliments without actually believing any of them. You reply with your own carefully measured flattery, praising their trade routes, their harvests, their regional cheeses, whatever makes them glow with diplomatic pride. Through it all, you observe the glances. Sideways glances between rival delegations, calculating glances at your expressions, hesitant glances exchanged when someone compliments you slightly too much. Diplomacy isn't spoken, it's performed. Every eye flick means something. Every tilt of the head. Every pause before taking another sip of wine. A messenger quietly enters with a sealed note. You don't break your gaze from the current ambassador. Demonstrating focus is part of the performance. But you notice how the room tenses. Is it news? A threat? A famine? Another sheep issue? They will speculate wildly before the hour ends. You redirect the conversation toward alliances. Someone mentions trade concessions. Someone else mentions travel rights. One ambassador tries to subtly push for a marriage alliance by praising the virtues of his king's niece in suspiciously specific detail. You sip your wine. Slowly. Very slowly. A small mishap occurs when one delegation offers you a decorative bowl crafted with gold filigree, a masterpiece, genuinely. But when the ambassador holds it out, his sleeve catches and the bowl almost drops. You catch it instinctively before it crashes to the floor. Gasps fill the room. Several diplomats pale. One nearly faints. If that bowl had shattered, negotiations would have collapsed harder than a poorly built castle keep. Instead, you smile graciously and lift it as though the near disaster was part of an elegant performance. The room exhales in collective relief. Talk drifts into more delicate territory, border rights, shared waterways, patrol routes. You answer with the kind of calm, neutral tone that sounds wise, even if half your mind is wondering whether someone fed the mongoose again. Hours pass. Diplomacy stretches time like taffy. Eventually, your master of ceremonies announces that the formal session is complete. The ambassadors bow out, leaving behind a trail of perfume, tension, and gift wrappers. When the doors close, you breathe deeply, finally able to drop the diplomatic mask for a moment. Your shoulders loosen. Your voice returns to its natural rhythm. You feel the warmth of the chamber envelop you, free from layered implications. Diplomacy, you realize, is a strange art. It's the dance of subtlety, the theater of courtesy, the performance of peace. And, sometimes, it's just extremely fancy small talk with very high stakes. You leave the presence chamber with its perfumes, silks, and compliments that definitely had expiration dates, and as the door closes behind you, a colder truth settles in your bones. Medieval royalty lives under constant, grinding pressure to stay alive. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, literally. Every day is a cautious waltz with danger, and now you feel its rhythm as you walk into the quieter, shadowed corridors of the inner palace. A guard trails behind you, another ahead of you, and two more pretend not to hover near the stairwell. They're subtle, but not subtle enough to hide the tension in their eyes. You sense it, the way you always do. The awareness that royal life is one long exercise in preventing accidents. A mainstream historical fact steps in beside you like a watchful sentinel. Medieval monarchs lived with a constant threat of poisoning, betrayal, ambush, and politically convenient, mishaps many of which were never officially recorded. The palaces might be full of gold, but they're also full of shadows, and shadows are where ambitions like to sharpen their knives. Your steward approaches, carrying a tray of midday refreshments, small pastries, dried fruit, a cup of watered wine. But before the tray reaches your hands, two tasters step forward. They're calm, practiced, and just a touch too solemn. They test each pastry with a silver needle, sniff the wine, taste a crumb, wait a moment. Only then does the steward offer you the tray. You take a sip. It's good, a little tart, normal. But knowing someone had to sample it first adds a faint metallic aftertaste to every royal meal. You continue walking. The corridor appears peaceful, but you've learned peace is always suspicious. Fewer attendants around means someone scheduled them elsewhere, which usually means your advisors want a quiet discussion. Sure enough, your spymaster emerges from a side, a doorway, a tall figure wrapped in dark fabric, tracking you with eyes that miss nothing. He bows, murmurs your title, then gestures for you to follow. You enter a small chamber, lit by 2 narrow windows and a single candle. The air smells of parchment and cold stone. The spymaster lays out reports, letters intercepted, conversations overheard, rumors gathered across inns, monasteries, and merchant roads. It's a tapestry of anxiety. One letter suggests a noble is amassing more soldiers than necessary for a border hunt. Another whispers of a merchant dealing in questionable powders that make people sleep without waking. Another mentions a servant who left the palace abruptly right after asking too many questions near the kitchens. A quirky historical tidbit sidles in like a conspiratorial whisper. Some medieval rulers wore amulets believed to protect against poison, often containing crushed emeralds, herbs, or bits of parchment with prayers. One king carried a tiny relic everywhere because he believed it would sting if a drink was tainted. Spoiler, it did not sting. It just made his pocket smell oddly floral. You don't wear an amulet today, but you do notice the ring on your finger steel beneath the gold. A hidden blade? No. A hidden compartment for antidotes? Also no. It's just a sturdy ring. But sturdy rings make you feel better about life. Historians still argue whether poisoning was actually common or simply feared. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. The fear was enormous, the attempts frequent enough to justify it, and the paranoia, well, omnipresent. You leave the chamber feeling the weight of vigilance. Outside, the guard captain intercepts you with updates. Additional watch rotations, gatehouse inspections, patrol adjustments. His eyes flick briefly toward the roofline hawks often circle there, but sometimes hawks aren't hawks at all but scouts from rival lands. You walk with him toward the gardens. The fresh air helps, though the scent of damp earth mixes with the tension you've carried since breakfast. The garden is peaceful, birds chirping, trees swaying, but even here, guards discreetly check bushes for hidden listeners. Their caution is justified. Monarchs have been ambushed in gardens before. At the fountain, a servant approaches with a folded cloth. Inside is a selection of herbs prepared by the palace physician. Rosemary for clarity, mint for digestion, a strange, bitter root that allegedly keeps the blood lively. You sniff it. It smells like regret. You hand it back. The physician himself soon appears, carrying a small wooden case filled with powders, tonics, and tinctures that look suspiciously like things you should never put inside a human body. He offers a tonic to strengthen your humors. You decline politely, unsure whether this particular brew is medicine, superstition, or a dare. He bows, unfazed. Medieval physicians are used to being politely avoided. As you walk back inside, you glance at the stone walls, thick, cold, impenetrable. Yet even they can't stop danger. Betrayal doesn't come through walls. It comes through smiles, handshakes, compliments, and alliances. It comes disguised as help, which is why your evening routine is practically a ritual in self-preservation. You enter your private chamber. Guards check under the bed, behind the curtains, inside the wardrobes. A servant tests the bath water for unusual scents. Another confirms the lock mechanisms. The captain asks if you want additional guards stationed nearby. You nod. Even your sleep is choreographed. You glance at the window. Through the shutters, the fading daylight paints the courtyard gold. Somewhere beyond the walls, people are living normal lives. Lives without tasters, spies, coded letters, or poison amulets. Lives where fear isn't part of breakfast. But for you, vigilance is part of breathing. As night approaches, you settle into your chair, feeling the quiet, steady pulse of the palace around you. The torches sputter. Footsteps echo faintly. Someone shifts their armor in the hallway. Every sound is familiar, and every sound reminds you, a medieval monarch is never just ruling. A medieval monarch is surviving. You move from the quiet tension of survival into another kind of battlefield, one with fewer swords, more quills, and infinitely more complaining nobles. Governance. The Royal Council, the great, lumbering machine of medieval administration that somehow manages to run the realm while also generating enough paperwork to kill a small ox. You enter the council chamber, a long room lined with wooden benches, tall-backed chairs, and enough scrolls to suggest that trees were not consulted about medieval politics. Sunlight streams through a narrow window, landing on a dust-moat ballet that feels almost peaceful until the council begins speaking. A mainstream historical fact takes a seat beside you, probably looking more organized than your actual advisors. Medieval governance required constant negotiation with nobles, clerics, landholders, and local officials. Kings didn't rule alone. They ruled by wrangling a committee that never stopped arguing. Absolutely nothing happened smoothly. Everything required approval, signatures, witnesses, and at least one person muttering that tradition dictates otherwise. The Chancellor begins with treasury matters. He unfurls a parchment so long it might qualify as a defensive weapon. He clears his throat, loudly, dramatically, the universal sign of medieval bureaucracy. "Your Majesty," he says, "the northern barons are late on taxes." "Again?" you reply. "Again," he confirms, as though taxes are optional suggestions rather than obligations. Before you can respond, Lord Ferrin, the most chronically offended noble in the room, slams his hand onto the table. "The levies are too high," he cries. "Our people suffer." You resist the urge to point, pray out that his suffering people live on land where the wine flows like water and the pigs are fed better than some monasteries. Instead, you nod thoughtfully, the royal equivalent of saying, "We will discuss this for the next hour whether we want to or not." Then comes the steward with a stack of petitions. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Everything from land disputes to bridge repairs to two families fighting over which cow crossed whose field first. You skim the top petition. It's about a goose with suspicious intentions. You put that one at the bottom of the stack. A quirky historical detail waddles into the chamber. Some medieval petitions were absurdly specific, including requests about runaway pigs, cursed wells, and neighbours accused of staring at fields too intently. People expected the monarch to solve everything, from national diplomacy to poultry crimes. Meanwhile, the scribe is already scribbling furiously, because scribes never stop. His quill scratches across parchment with the intensity of a man racing against history. Ink stains dot his fingers like battle scars. He pauses only to dip the quill, then continues without blinking. You're fairly certain you've never seen him sleep. The conversation shifts to a territorial feud. Two neighbouring barons argue over who owns a stretch of forest famous for producing mediocre berries but excellent firewood. They argue loudly, dramatically, and with the precise energy of two siblings who have been fighting about the same toy since infancy. You raise a hand for silence. Both men fall quiet. Their eyebrows bristle with anticipation. You declare a ruling shared rights, seasonal boundaries, mutual patrols. They both nod stiffly, pretending to be satisfied while planning how to circumvent your decision the moment they leave the room. Historians still argue whether medieval councils were genuinely collaborative or simply a polite arena where nobles tried to manipulate royal decisions. Today, sitting at this table, you suspect the answer is yes, to both. Next comes financial planning. The treasurer presents a wooden chest taxes collected from the southern villages. He opens it. Inside are coins, wool bundles, jars of honey, even a cured ham. Medieval taxes were not tidy. The ham smells really good. You try not to stare. Then the marshal arrives, armoured and stern, to report troop readiness. He claims your soldiers are prepared for anything. You know this is only partially true because he says it every week with the same tone, whether the army is thriving or on the brink of mutiny. The council listens. Some nod, some grunt. One noble carefully adjusts his hat to appear wiser. You ask about road repairs. Everyone groans. Roads are expensive, muddy, political, and somehow always broken. A bridge somewhere collapsed under mysterious weight, which probably means a merchant overloaded it with barrels of something he absolutely did not declare at the toll. You instruct the local reeve to investigate. He will, but he will also complain about it in his next letter. Council meetings continue for what feels like an entire season. You navigate each topic with forced serenity. Trade agreements, market regulations, vassal obligations, border patrols, town charters. Even a fisherman claiming mermaids stole his nets. You make a note to look into that one not because you believe him, but because old legends have a habit of snowballing into mass panic. By midday, the air feels thick. Arguments loop. Updates repeat. Someone brings in bread and cheese, but etiquette dictates you can't leave, nap, or crawl under the table. You keep listening, nodding, ruling. Governance is not glamorous. It's persistent, complicated, repetitive, and absolutely vital. Finally, after hours of deliberation, you rise. A hush falls. Even the nobles straighten. You give final instructions, dismiss the council, and step into the corridor where the air feels wonderfully, impossibly fresh. You exhale, rolling your shoulders, letting the tension slide off like loosening a too tight belt. Ruling a medieval realm means negotiating with tantrums, sometimes from nobles, sometimes from taxes, and sometimes from geography. It means choosing which problems get solved and which ones merely get postponed. As you walk toward the solar, you realize something comforting. You survive today's council with your dignity, your patience, and your ham still intact. Not bad for medieval governance. You exit the council chamber feeling as though every drop of moisture has been wrung from your soul by endless petitions, territorial complaints, and that one noble who insists on sighing theatrically whenever taxes are mentioned. But there's no rest, not for a medieval ruler, because now comes a tradition older than most of the stones in your palace. The royal progress. Travelling. Moving the entire court. Taking your royal self and roughly 300 other humans and several animals who absolutely did not volunteer across terrible medieval roads for reasons that range from inspect the realm to remind people you still dot. You stand in the courtyard, staring at the organized chaos of preparations. Horses snort clouds into the cold air. Servants load carts with trunks that seem heavier than your treasury. Scribes cling to bundles of parchment. Guards adjust their chainmail, grimacing because chainmail is approximately as comfortable as sleeping in a bag of cutlery. A mainstream historical fact trots proudly into view. In medieval Europe, royalty travelled constantly, partly for show, partly for administration, and partly because castles were not built for long-term sanitation or refrigeration. Staying in one place too long was considered unhealthy, and frankly, smelly. Your travel master approaches, bowing with the weariness of a man who has already debated wagon weight limits 17 times this morning. "Your Majesty," he says, "we are prepared for departure." You glance at the line of wagons. Prepared is a generous word. They look like overburdened wooden boxes held together by prayer and wishful thinking. One already lists to the left, groaning like it's contemplating retirement. Your horse waits nearby a magnificent destrier with glossy mane and the self-esteem of a creature who knows it's the most attractive thing in the courtyard. You pet its neck. It accepts the affection, but also judges you for wearing too many layers. To mount gracefully, mounting a warhorse in full regalia should be an Olympic event. You settle into the saddle with all the elegance you can muster, trying not to squish anything important beneath the weight of your cloak. The court forms up behind you, a procession so long it may technically count as a travelling village. Carts, guards, cooks, falconers, courtiers, scribes, random nobles who simply refuse to stay home, all of them ready to bounce painfully along medieval roadways. The gates open, you ride out, and the discomfort begins instantly. The road outside the castle walls is less road and more collection of muddy memories. Your horse sinks slightly with each step, lifting its legs with the exaggerated disgust of someone walking across a wet floor in socks. A quirky historical detail rattles into place like a cart hitting a pothole. Royal progress routes were sometimes lined with flowers, banners, or entire temporary arches. But once you left the decorated areas, the travel became brutally real, uneven paths, mud deep enough to steal boots, and ruts capable of swallowing wagon wheels whole. Speaking of wheels, one of your wagons immediately hits a rut with a noise so dramatic it sounds like a dragon sneezing. The wagon tilts, rights itself, then creaks ominously. Your steward mutters a prayer to every saint associated with carpentry. You ride onward. Wind cuts through your cloak with medieval enthusiasm. Mud splashes your boots. A bird in a nearby tree squawks as if mocking you. The countryside unfolds in rolling hills, winter bare branches, grazing sheep, and a few peasants who freeze mid-task when they spot your procession. They bow, wide-eyed, attempting to look respectful while also trying to understand why the entire royal household is invading their Tuesday. Your guards remain alert, scanning the surroundings with practiced vigilance. Travel is risky. Roads can hide bandits, rebels, or merchants with extremely aggressive sales pitches. After an hour, you stop near a ford to let the wagons catch up. The river is shallow but loud, water rushing over stones like whispered warnings. A page brings you a cup of watered wine. You sip it gratefully. The wind whips your cloak like an impatient banner. A scribe jogs up to you, ink-smudged and out of breath. "Your Majesty," he pants. The map appears. "Incorrect." You raise an eyebrow. The map is always incorrect. Medieval maps are approximate suggestions based on rumor, legend, and one guy's memory of a road he took 15 years ago. You nod at the scribe. "Very well. We shall trust the road instead." He swallows hard. Roads are not known for being trustworthy. As the procession resumes, the mud thickens. Your horse trudges onward like a stoic champion. The wagons struggle. One gets stuck. A group of servants push from behind, shouting encouragement and curses, in polite wording, because you're nearby. The wagon budges, then rocks, then lurches free, with a triumphant splatter that coats 3 servants and 1 unfortunate noble. You pretend not to see the noble's expression. Hours pass. You stop briefly to rest in a village whose inhabitants greet you with timid curiosity. The local reeve rushes forward, bowing deeply, offering bread, cheese, and something that may be beer or maybe a stronger brew designed to erase memories. The villagers stare at you, not with fear, but with awe. Your clothes, your horse, your entourage, it's all a spectacle to them. A traveling miracle. A reminder that their distant king is flesh and blood. You nod warmly, accepting their offerings. A little girl hands you a small wildflower. You take it, smile, and tuck it into your glove. Word will spread for months that you accepted a simple flower from a child. The gesture will become a local legend. Somewhere, a bard will compose an overly dramatic song about it. Historians still argue whether royal progresses were genuinely welcomed or merely endured by the people who had to host them. Hosting meant offering food, lodging, and often gifts, expensive obligations for small villages. But at the same time, seeing the monarch in person was rare enough to spark lifelong stories. By late afternoon, you reach your temporary lodging, a manor house, prepared hastily but reverently for your arrival. The bed is lumpy. The room is draughty. The food is honest but simple. You miss your palace comforts, but there's something grounding about being in a place where life hasn't been choreographed by etiquette and hierarchy. Servants bustle, arranging your chambers while locals gather outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of royal splendor through the windows. You let them. It's part of the ritual, part of the spectacle, part of the delicate thread connecting ruler and realm. As night settles and torches flare along the manor walls, you sit at a wooden table eating stew that tastes more delicious than it should. You're exhausted, bruised, from riding, chilled through but also strangely alive. Traveling through your own kingdom reminds you of something easy to forget inside palace walls. This land is made of people, not just politics, and no matter how muddy, draughty, or uncomfortable the journey becomes, these travels stitch you into the fabric of the realm in ways that even the grandest throne room never could. You wake the next morning in that draughty manor house with a stiff neck, a protesting spine, and the faint feeling that your soul briefly left your body sometime around 3 a.m. But travel waits for no medieval monarch. After a modest breakfast and an enthusiastic farewell from a village child who is definitely going to claim you knighted him in spirit, you ride onward. By midday, the towers of your next destination rise in the distance. A royal castle, one of many scattered across your realm, each promising security, majesty, and at least 3 new discomforts. Castles inspire awe from afar, but stepping inside one reminds you that majestic stone fortress is medieval code for cold, echoing, draughty inconvenience, with excellent acoustics for your suffering. You cross the drawbridge. The portcullis rattles upward like a hungry metal jaw. Inside, the courtyard buzzes with activity, smiths hammering, children chasing chickens, guards adjusting their gear as if trying to impress the passing monarch, and a dog rolling in mud with the confidence of someone who knows nobody can stop him. A mainstream historical fact trudges in with the weight of a granite block. Medieval castles were not comfortable homes. They were defensive structures designed to withstand sieges, not winter chills or the monarch's desire for a cozy nap. Thick walls trapped cold air. Windows were narrow slits meant for archers. Everything echoed. Everything was hard. Everything felt just slightly damp, even when it wasn't. Your chamberlain greets you eagerly, as though hoping your arrival will partially thaw the great hall. It doesn't. The moment you step inside, a gust of cold air hits you with the same enthusiasm as a playful slap from a frozen fish. The great hall is immense, with tall rafters and banners hanging like colorful icicles. The fireplace roars, but it warms only the 3 feet directly in front of it. You walk closer, savoring those 3 glorious feet of heat, before relocating to the high table where, naturally, the warmth fades instantly. A servant places a cushion on your chair to protect your royal posterior from the cruel wooden planks. You thank them silently, because sitting through an entire feast on bare hardwood is an ordeal you wish on no one, not even that noble who keeps writing angry letters about insufficient goose representation at feasts. Your steward arrives with a list of repairs, roof leaks, loose stones, a drafty corner where someone insists they saw a ghost. "We've checked," he says, "and only found a very large spider." You nod. In medieval castles, spiders count as roommates. A quirky historical tidbit scurries along the wall like a trapped mouse. Some castles had murder holes built into ceilings above gateways, not just for defense, but to dump hot sand, boiling water, or extremely unfortunate liquids onto attackers. You glance up. The castle's murder hole is directly above where you're standing. You take one subtle step to the left. One never knows. Historians still argue whether castles were as drafty as chronicles claim, or whether chroniclers simply exaggerated to justify complaining. Standing here, wrapped in layers and still cold, you suspect the chroniclers may have underplayed it. You head upstairs toward your private chambers. The spiral staircase is narrow, designed to give right-handed defenders the advantage. You ascend carefully, aware that tripping here would be the least majestic thing you could possibly do. At the top, you reach your chamber, a room that manages to look impressive and uncomfortable at the same time. Thick tapestries depicting heroic ancestors line the walls, but they flap slightly in the breeze, seeping through the window slit. One tapestry shows an ancestor slaying a boar. Another shows an ancestor slaying a far larger boar. The third shows a boar slaying a man. You try not to think too hard about that family symbolism. Your bed stands grandly against the wall, draped in velvet. It looks luxurious, until you sit on it and immediately discover it tilts ever so slightly to the left, suggesting either a structural flaw or the bed's desire to escape the room entirely. You remove your cloak. A servant lights braziers around the room. The heat they offer is polite at best, like small campfires telling you, "We believe in you emotionally, but physically you're on your own." Below your window slit, the courtyard noise rises in a strangely comforting mix. Hooves clattering, people shouting greetings, the rhythmic scrape of a broom, a blacksmith arguing loudly with a stubborn horseshoe. The castle may be drafty, but it's alive. You descend again for a brief tour with your steward. He shows you the chapel, small, cold, echoing. He shows you the storage rooms filled with barrels, sacks of grain, and one very judgmental goose. He shows you the guard tower, where a soldier tries to look alert, but is definitely fighting the world's most exhausting battle against boredom. Then there's the latrine tower. You peer inside. You regret peering inside. Enough said. You move into the outer ward, where livestock wander freely. Chickens cluck, goats bleat, pigs snuffle, one of them nudging your boot in the vague hope of being fed. You pat its head, which instantly earns cheers from watching peasants who will retell the story as proof of your kindness. Somewhere, a bard will exaggerate the moment until you and the pig are lifelong companions. Stone, wood, wind, echoes. Castles are full of moments where awe collides with inconvenience. Wind whistles down the corridors, turning every hallway into a gloomy flute. You pass by a window slit and feel a blast of air so cold it could make a glacier shiver. You swear the castle is laughing at you. Your chamberlain leads you to dinner, held not in some glamorous royal dining room but in the great hall again, because that's where heat and light are concentrated. Meat roasts on spits, bread bakes in nearby ovens. Dogs slip beneath tables waiting for fallen scraps. Servants bustle, balancing trays with practiced ease. As you sit at the high table, the fire crackles. The hall hums with chatter. The cold persists, but you grow strangely fond of it. There's life in these stones, hard, ancient, imperfect life. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth of stew and the sound of laughter echoing through rafters. One noble claims this castle is haunted. Another swears the draught in the southwest tower once extinguished a torch with malicious intent. You feel a presence behind you, but it's just the hound begging for meat. By the time you retreat to your chamber for the night, the castle's chill has settled into your bones like an old friend. You slip under the covers, pulling the heavy furs close, and as the wind whistles through the stones, you realize something rare. Castles may be cold, uncomfortable, impossible to heat, and occasionally haunted, but they are also the heartbeats of medieval royalty, stoic, weathered, and alive with stories that stretch across 1,000 years. Morning light filters weakly through the narrow window slit, landing in a pale stripe across your chamber floor. The castle is still cold, of course it is, and your breath ghosts softly in the air as you rise. Today brings a different kind of royal endurance test. Not travel, not council drama, not diplomacy conducted with scented oils. No, today is all about ceremony, and medieval ceremonies are not short. You descend to the great hall, where the air buzzes with hushed preparation. Servants scurry back and forth carrying fabrics, candles, scrolls, cushions, incense, more candles, more cushions, banners, and at least one heavy object you dear God hope does not fall on anyone's foot. A clerk checks a long list. A priest mutters a prayer. Someone in the corner practices a bow so passionate you're worried he might sprain something. A mainstream historical fact steps forward with the stateliness of a man wearing 12 layers of ecclesiastical robe. Medieval ceremonies, coronations, feast days, dedications, weddings, investitures, treaty signings could last hours or even days, involving prayers, chants, processions, symbolic gestures, and long speeches that tested the crowd's faith more than any theological doctrine. They weren't events, they were marathons disguised as pageantry. Today's ceremony is a dedication feast in honor of a newly completed chapel wing. The chapel is lovely, painted with saints, carved with devotion, and cold enough to store cheese. But the dedication ritual is what people will remember. The master of ceremonies approaches, carrying a staff adorned with ribbons. His expression is equal parts reverence and dread. It's his job to shepherd dozens of nobles, clergy, musicians, and guests through a choreographed sequence that makes medieval court etiquette look like child's play. He explains the order of events. You listen. The list is long, very long. Somewhere between solemn entrance and presentation of embroidered offerings, your mind drifts gently towards sleep. But the time comes. You don your ceremonial garments richer, heavier, and more elaborate than anything you've worn so far. Embroidered with gold, edged with fur, so weighed down in symbolism you could anchor a ship with the hem alone. A quirky historical detail glides in wearing entirely too many jewels. Some medieval monarchs wore garments so heavy during rituals that attendants had to discreetly support them from behind to keep them upright. You feel a sympathetic tug on your shoulder blade and suspect your attendants are doing exactly that right now. Historians still argue whether these ceremonial garments truly inspired awe or simply inspired a collective decision, not to mention how faint the monarch looked. The trumpets sound. Slowly, painfully slowly, you process toward the chapel. The crowd divides like water around a ship's bow. Faces shine with awe, curiosity, and, in the case of one small boy, sheer boredom. You sympathize deeply. The clergy chants. The chant echoes beautifully off the stone walls and continues, and continues, and continues. You begin to feel like the last vowel of each word could last until the next harvest. You kneel during the blessing. The stone floor is hard enough to make your kneecaps forget happiness exists. A priest swings incense past you, filling the air with a smoky sweetness that hovers somewhere between holy atmosphere and accidental fumigation. You rise, process, listen, kneel again, stand again, respond to prayers, hold a candle, accept a scroll, touch the chapel door with your fingertips, receive 3 separate blessings, present a symbolic gift, pretend not to notice your foot falling asleep. The clergy reads a scripture selection that grows longer with every line. You watch the candles drip slow rivers of wax, imagining each drip as a countdown to the feast. Your stomach rumbles quietly but meaningfully. Nobles seated nearby whisper about the ceremony's majesty, though at least 2 of them appear dangerously close to nodding off. One lady discreetly pinches her own arm to stay conscious. You consider copying her. Meanwhile, the musicians play. First a slow hymn, then a slower hymn. Then a hymn so slow you suspect they accidentally invented the medieval lullaby. Then comes the offering procession. Oh yes, a long line of nobles approaches, each carrying a token-embroidered cloth, coins, candles, herbs, small statues, or, in one baffling case, a goose wearing a decorative ribbon. The goose honks with deep ceremonial disapproval. Its handler bows apologetically. The clergy pretends this is normal. You smile regally, because nothing says royal composure like dignified acceptance of a ribbon-wearing goose. The ritual continues with more blessings, more speeches, and a homily from the bishop, who looks deeply moved by his own voice. His sermon covers virtue, piety, sacrifice, humility, a minor digression about the importance of honesty in tax declarations, awkward, and then circles back to virtue. You nod gently throughout, letting your expression hover between serenity and "please end this mercifully." Hours pass. At one point, you wonder if the ceremony will continue until the sun sets. At another point, you consider the possibility that you accidentally died earlier and are now experiencing the afterlife's longest onboarding process. Then finally, mercifully, the bishop utters the final blessing. A sigh ripples through the crowd, discreet but unmistakable. Some people shift in their seats like prisoners hearing the cell door unlock. A noble discreetly stretches his legs. A lady takes the deepest breath she has taken all year. You process out of the chapel, mind slightly foggy from incense and monotony. The cool air outside feels like rebirth. But the ceremony isn't over. Now comes the feast. The great hall buzzes with renewed energy as tables groan under platters of meat, bread, roasted vegetables, jellied fish, pies, pastries. And because this castle never disappoints another goose, alive and honking indignantly as though filing a complaint with HR. You sit at the high table. The first course arrives. People relax, chatter, laugh. Wine flows. Minstrels play. Conversation unfurls like warm cloth. Your shoulders loosen. Your spirit lifts. The ceremony may have lasted longer than some marriages, but this moment, this glowing, noisy, joyful hall, makes it feel worth it. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely loved ceremonies or simply loved the feasts afterward. Based on your first-hand experience, the latter feels very credible. By the time you retreat to your chamber, your feet ache, your cloak smells faintly of incense, and your ears still hum with chants. But you made it through. Medieval ceremonies test patience, posture, stamina, and sometimes sanity. And tonight, you survived them with grace. You wake the next morning still hearing faint echoes of chanting in your head. Either the ceremony blessed you more than you realized, or your brain is politely asking for a refund. But there's no time to dwell on sore knees or over-incensed clothing. Because today, the castle feels different. Tighter, quieter, more watchful. War sits heavily in the air. Not actual battle, not yet. But the looming possibility of it, which is almost worse. War in the medieval world is rarely a sudden explosion. It's a long, restless night stretched across months of tense whispers, border skirmishes, sharpened swords, and people pretending they're sleeping fine when everyone absolutely is not. You move through the corridor, feeling the shift immediately. Guards stand straighter. Servants glance at you with quick, worried eyes. Messages arrive more frequently. The steward looks like he hasn't blinked in 30 hours. Even the dog seems unusually solemn, which is a terrible omen. A mainstream, historical fact marches into view. Medieval rulers made war decisions slowly, painfully, and often in the dead of night because war wasn't just a matter of strategy. It was a matter of fate, omens, alliances, money, weather, superstition, and whether the nobles were in the mood. Armies required months to assemble. Supplies had to be gathered, roads checked, castles reinforced, horses fed, contracts negotiated. And through it all, the monarch lay awake wondering whether any prayer would be enough. You descend to the strategy chamber, a room thick with maps, figurines, scrolls, and the unmistakable tension of men who have been arguing for hours in polite voices that mean the opposite of polite. The marshal bows deeply. "Your Majesty," he says, "the scouts bring troubling reports." He gestures to a map spread across the table. Tiny carved stones mark border towns. A few sit under ominous red markers. A border lord, predictable, arrogant, and very bad at minding his own. Fields has begun a series of provocations. He's raiding villages, testing defenses, prodding like a man sticking a sleeping bear with a stick. Your council stands in grim clusters. Some nobles argue for swift retaliation, others urge diplomacy. One insists the matter will resolve itself. It won't. Another suggests hiring mercenaries, Danger. Another proposes waiting for the spring thaw. You suspect he simply hates winter campaigning. You listen. You ask questions. You study the map. But beneath it all runs a deeper, quieter truth. You're not deciding whether war will come. You're deciding how gracefully to meet it. A messenger arrives breathlessly, clutching a sealed letter. You break the wax. The news is worse. 2 villages burned, survivors fled, livestock taken. The border lord is getting bolder. The room stiffens. A quirky historical detail unsheathes itself like a hidden dagger. Some medieval rulers refused to make war decisions without consulting astrologers or dream interpreters. They'd wait for the right alignment of stars or the right interpretation of symbolic imagery, everything from comets to bird behavior to the number of candles that sputtered during prayer. You don't have your astrologer present right now, but you can practically hear him whispering, "Mars is ascendant," even though you know he makes up half his recommendations on the spot. Historians still argue whether rulers genuinely believed in these omens or simply used them as excuses to stall political pressure. But here, in this cold stone chamber, you understand why they clung to signs. War is terrifying. Any reason to delay, it feels meaningful. The marshal spreads another map, tracing troop movements. "If we strike swiftly," he says, "we can push them back before reinforcements arrive." The treasurer coughs into his sleeve. "Assuming," he adds delicately, "we can afford to field a full campaign." You rub your temples. War eats money the way the castle goose eats unattended bread, swiftly, efficiently, unapologetically. You excuse yourself for a moment and step into the adjacent solar. The sunlight is pale, but warm enough to pierce a little of the gloom. You lean against the stone, letting the moment breathe. War decisions are not made in the council chamber. They're made in these quiet, solitary pauses where fear and responsibility weigh equally on your shoulders. You think of the civilians on the border, their homes, their fields, their families. You think of the nobles, eager for glory but unwilling to acknowledge the cost. You think of the treasury, which would prefer you declare peace forever and retire into a life of modest budgeting. You think of your own sleeplessness. Last night, you tossed beneath heavy furs, your mind replaying every whispered rumor. War creeps into your dreams, sits on your chest, whispers about consequences you don't want to face. You return to the council room. The nobles await your decision with thinly veiled hunger, some for justice, some for vengeance, some for political advantage. The marshal waits with grim readiness. The treasurer waits with dread. You speak clearly. You call for preparation, reinforcement, negotiation backed with strength, scouts to increase patrols, messengers to allies, provisions for villages, fortification checks, diplomatic letters delivered with firmness. It's not a declaration of war. Not yet. But it's the first step towards something you cannot avoid. The council exhales as though released from a spell. Plans scatter into motion. Orders are carried out. The marshal salutes, already shaping troop formations in his mind. The scribe scribbles like the fate of the world depends on ink speed. Later, as evening settles and torches glow against the castle walls, you sit alone in your chamber. The wind howls through the stone like a restless spirit. You stare at the candle flame, watching it bend slightly with every draft. You remember the way your ancestors faced war. Some with courage, some with dread, some with disastrous optimism. You wonder which you will be. You lie down in your bed, heavy furs pulling close around you. The castle creaks. Footsteps echo faintly in the corridor. Somewhere outside, an owl calls a lonely, haunting note that slips deep into your bones. And as your eyes drift heavily towards sleep, one thought settles. War decisions are not made on the battlefield. They're made in nights like these, quiet, sleepless, heavy with fear and responsibility, where the monarch stares into darkness and hope's dawn brings clarity. Morning comes quietly, but not gently. You wake with the weight of looming war still sitting on your chest, as if it stayed the night on purpose. You dress slowly, letting attendants fasten clasps and adjust layers, while your mind drifts into another corner of royal life, a place rarely shown in illuminated manuscripts, yet endlessly fascinating in its own dusty, secretive way. treasures, vaults, hidden chambers, private hoards of objects so strange, so valuable, or so embarrassing that only royalty and a handful of very trusted people ever know they exist. Your chamberlain escorts you down a narrow side corridor you've walked past 100 times without noticing. Today, the torchlight reveals a small iron-bound door that blends into the stone wall like a secret whisper because it is one. The chamberlain unlocks it with a key the size of a young carrot. Inside, the air grows cooler. The torch flickers against the walls, illuminating a steep staircase spiraling downward. The stones are worn from centuries of cautious footsteps. Your cloak brushes the walls as you descend. It smells of dust, metal, and a hint of something herbal. A mainstream historical fact creaks open like an old chest. Many medieval palaces and castles had hidden rooms, vaults, and treasure storerooms not always grand, but essential for storing wealth, documents, regalia, and politically sensitive items. These rooms were as much about secrecy as security. Only a select few knew their layout. Some were passed down through generations with whispered instructions. The chamber at the bottom of the stairs appears small at first glance, but then the torch reveals shelves extending deep into the shadows. Treasures glitter, scrolls whisper, locks gleam. This is not the public treasury. This is your private storehouse. The chamberlain hands you the torch and steps back respectfully. His silence is intentional. This room is more confession booth than vault. Every monarch stores pieces of their life they can't display. You move toward the first set of shelves, gold chalices, jeweled daggers, decorative armor that has never seen battle because it would snap in half on impact. A carved ivory comb once belonging to a queen from 3 generations past. You lift it gently. The ivory is smooth, worn down by hands long gone. Next, you find an ornate chest, inlaid with mother of pearl. It's locked with a mechanism so old, even the chamberlain hesitates. You open it carefully. Inside rests a crown, not the one you wear at ceremonies, but an older, smaller one, tarnished at the edges. Its gems cloudy. This is a relic of early kingship, worn by a ruler whose legend is half history, half bedtime story. You picture him. Tall, grim, noble, heroic, or perhaps short, cranky, and good at self-promotion. Hard to say. A quirky historical detail peeks out from the shadows. Some monarchs kept embarrassing heirlooms hidden away, botched portraits, awkward gifts from foreign leaders, even strange relics like taxidermied exotic animals that did not survive their voyage. In one surviving inventory, a king owned a mummified fish of unknown origin, kept in a velvet-lined box. No explanation given. Iconic. You open another chest and immediately understand why this room stays locked. Inside lies a stuffed bird, a large one with glassy eyes, and feathers that have seen better centuries. A label beneath it reads, in faded script, "The Raven of Portents, do not display." You laugh softly. Your ancestors knew when something was both meaningful and deeply silly. Historians still argue whether such items were kept for superstition, nostalgia, or because medieval rulers had difficulty throwing things away. Judging by this room, the answer is yes. On another shelf, you find rolled parchments tied with faded ribbon. You unroll one carefully. It's a treaty drafted 100 years ago, sealed beautifully, never signed. Why? A note scribbled at the bottom reads, "Meeting postponed due to illness." You chuckle. Illness likely meant politics, or a goat biting someone important. A locked cabinet catches your attention. The chamberlain hesitates, then hands you a second key. Inside are jewels, not many, but extraordinary. A ruby set in gold, shaped like a flame. A necklace of pearls, so luminous they glow in torchlight. A ring, bearing the crest of a house long extinct. And then there's the final alcove. A small wooden chest sits alone on a pedestal. Plain, unadorned, almost intentionally unimpressive. Those are always the dangerous ones. You open it gently. Inside lie letters, dozens of them bound in twine. Some are from allies, some from rivals, some from people who wrote with passion, love, or fury, centuries before you were born. Words of devotion, words of threats, words of longing, words so private no monarch would dare let them see daylight. One letter catches your eye, written in a delicate hand, the ink soft brown with age. "My dearest heart," it begins. You read a few lines, tender, intimate, human, and you understand something profound. Royalty leaves behind artifacts of grandeur. Yes, but also artifacts of vulnerability. You return the letter gently to the chest. Near the back wall, another niche holds items of a different kind, things the realm must never lose. Seals for treaties, drafts of laws, maps marking old borders, a codex detailing ancient privileges granted to certain towns. Documents that, if lost or revealed prematurely, could ignite political chaos. Your fingers brush across them, feeling the strange blend of dust and destiny. This vault holds not only treasure, but memory, wealth, humiliation, power, stories, secrets, lives. As you prepare to leave, you notice something else. A narrow, half-hidden slot in the stone wall. A secret door. You press it lightly. It clicks. The chamberlain tenses. You push. The stone swings inward just enough to reveal darkness beyond a private passage known only to monarchs. It likely connects to other hidden rooms, perhaps even escape routes. Castles often hid such paths, though they rarely appear on architectural plans. You do not enter. Not today. You close it gently, its click echoing through the chamber like a heartbeat. When you ascend the staircase again, stepping back into the living world of the castle, you feel different. Heavier, but steadier. Treasures, secrets, relics, regrets. They remind you that kingship isn't just about the present. It's a ledger of centuries, a vault of everything your ancestors carried and everything you will leave behind. And as you return to the corridors lit by daylight, one thought follows you like a whisper from the vault below. Even 1,000 years of royalty fits into a single room when you know where to look. You emerge from the vault carrying the weight of centuries, but by the time you reach the upper corridor, something else has crept into the castle, quiet, invisible, and far more dangerous than any scheming noble. The halls feel different, not tense like yesterday's war talk, not ceremonial like the chapel. No, this is something colder. A single cough echoes down the stairwell. You stop. Your guard stiffens. Plague has reached the realm. Not here fully, not yet, but close enough that the whispers have outrun the illness itself. Close. Enough that the steward's face has the same expression people wear when they hear thunder and see no clouds. Close enough that every footstep echoes with a sharper edge. You continue forward, slow and measured, absorbing the mood that has spread like frost through the corridors. A mainstream historical fact settles on your shoulders with all the subtlety of a falling anvil. Plague, whether the Black Death or earlier waves of pestilence, shaped medieval rule more than wars ever did. Monarchs fled cities. Courts fragmented. Trade collapsed. Entire administrations vanished into the dark quiet of empty streets. When plague approached, even kings felt small. Your physician appears at your side before you've taken 10 more steps. He bows with frantic politeness, clutching a small bundle of herbs that smell like someone tried to cure illness by aggressively insulting your nose. "Your Majesty," he murmurs, "we've received word of sickness in 2 villages to the east. Sudden fever. Swellings." You inhale sharply. The courtiers behind you exchange glances. Fear ripples through the hall, polished, gentle, but unmistakable. The physician presents a small cloth pouch of dried rosemary, sage, and something else unidentifiable. "For protection," he says. The tone implies scientific certainty. The scent implies absolute guesswork. You nod anyway, because in this world, hope is medicine too. A quirky historical detail creeps in behind your physician like an overly dramatic stage whisper. Many medieval rulers carried posies, vinegar-soaked sponges, or pomanders filled with herbs believed to ward off plague-bearing bad air. Some wore bejeweled containers filled with perfumes around their necks. Others burned aromatic woods until their chambers smelled like a very nervous forest. Your own chamberlain now hovers with a silver pomander filled with lavender and cloves. He holds it out with the reverence usually reserved for relics. You take it. It's warm. From his hands, fragrant, oddly comforting. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed plague spread through miasma, or whether they simply clung to explanations that offered structure in a terrifyingly unpredictable world. Surviving records suggest both, and you feel the truth of that instinct now. You walk toward the great hall. The doors open. Silence greets you. Nobles sit far apart rather than clustered together. Servants avoid brushing past one another. People look at the floor, the walls, anywhere except each other's faces, as if eye contact might carry illness. Even the dogs sense something. They move slowly, tails low, sniffing the air. Your marshal rises first. He bows, but not deeply. Your Majesty, are the rumors true? You answer evenly, with the controlled tone of a leader who must carry calm even when calm feels impossible. We have reports, nothing confirmed inside the castle. The hall exhales shakily, but the relief is thin. Next come decisions. The steward recommends restricting travel. The marshal suggests reinforcing gates not against armies, but against travelers. The treasurer wrings his hands, knowing quarantines will shrink markets. The chaplain urges prayer. The priest recommends processions, then withdraws the suggestion just as quickly. Remembering processions mean crowds, and crowds mean disaster. Your advisors talk over one another in quiet panic. You lift your hand. Silence falls like a velvet shroud. We proceed carefully, you say. We isolate incoming travelers. We set up watch stations at the village roads. We send grain to the outlying hamlets, so people need not gather in markets. The steward nods vigorously. A noblewoman murmurs wise. Another taps his fingers nervously, eyeing the windows as if he expects plague to seep through the cracks. But all their anxious gestures fade the moment the physician clears his throat again. There is more news, he says in a thin voice. Another village. More fever. A child who died at dawn. The hall grows colder, again colder than any castle draft. Later, when the council disperses like frightened birds, you stand alone by the window slit. Outside, the sky glows grey. Clouds hang low. The wind carries a scent both crisp and unsettling damp earth, and something faintly metallic. You think of the village families, their cottages, their narrow beds, their anxious parents hovering over sick children, their absence of medicine, absence of certainty, absence of time. You press your fingertips to the stone. How do kings fight an invisible enemy? You leave the hall, steps muffled by thick rushes on the floor. You pass a servant who bows too quickly, almost stumbling. You pass a hound lying silent, no tail wag, sensing the shift in human heartbeat. You pass the chapel door, where one monk kneels alone before a candle that flickers with unspoken fear. As evening deepens, you retreat to your chamber. The pomander rests in your palm. Its scent rises softly, clove, lavender, rosemary, a tiny defiance against an enormous threat. Your attendants prepare your bed, but you hesitate before lying down. You drift to the window. Night air brushes your face, cool but not comforting. People say plague rides on the wind, hides in breath, clings to clothing. People say it chooses at random, spares at random, kills swiftly. You do not fear death, not truly. Kingship teaches you to expect it always near. But you fear what plague does to your realm, your people, your court, your legacy, your next breath. Historians still argue why plague hit some places harder, why some survived untouched, why some families were devastated while neighbors lived. But the truth is simpler, heavier. Plague makes kings feel helpless. Tonight, as you slip beneath the furs, your thoughts drift like smoke toward the eastern villages. You imagine candles burning in their windows. You imagine mothers sitting awake. You imagine prayers whispered into dark air. You close your eyes, and all you can do is breathe carefully, quietly, hoping dawn brings better news, hoping dawn comes at all. You move through the next few days with plague rumors at your back like a cold draft, but life in the castle doesn't stop. It just changes tone. People talk a little softer, laugh a little less loudly, pray a little more often. And in the middle of all of it, something else hums along, tireless and invisible, just as powerful as disease and war. Stories, whispers, the endlessly restless creature that is your royal reputation. It starts small, as it always does. A servant overhears you ask about grain shipments for sickened villages and reports that the king cares deeply. Another servant watches you hesitate before drinking wine and decides you're tormented by secret guilt. Neither is exactly right. But truth matters less than telling, because everything you do feeds one of two beasts, legend or rumor. A mainstream historical fact sidles up to you like a nosy courtier. Medieval kings and queens depended heavily on their image, crafted not through portraits and news articles, but through chronicles, songs, church sermons, and worn-out stories told in firelit rooms. Most of your subjects will never see your face. They'll only know the version of you that survives the journey from mouth to ear. Today, your Chancellor bursts into the solar holding a manuscript like it's on fire. Your Majesty, he huffs. A wandering minstrel has been singing a song in the market that misrepresents your character. Of course he has. You raise an eyebrow. How so? The Chancellor clears his throat. He describes you as the king with the weary eyes who fears his own crown. You blink. You're not sure whether to be offended or impressed. You do have weary eyes, and the crown is heavy. Accurate slander is the most irritating kind. The Chancellor proposes banning the song. You know how that story goes. Ban something, and suddenly it becomes everyone's favorite bedtime tune. You wave the suggestion away with sleepy dignity. Let him sing, you say. But send our own minstrels out with a better song. If you can't silence rumors, you can drown them. So you summon the court poet, a thin, intense man who treats metaphors like sacred relics. You instruct him to compose something flattering but not too ridiculous. No more comparing me to the sun, you say. People live under clouds half the year. He bows, eyes shining. Then you shall be the steadfast star, Majesty. You sigh. Fine. A quirky historical tidbit comes trotting in, humming a tune. Some medieval rulers secretly sponsored flattering miracle stories about themselves, tales of healing touches, prophetic dreams, or saintly visions that just happened to feature them prominently. One chronicle even claimed a king's shadow cured headaches. Imagine being remembered as the monarch whose silhouette was medieval aspirin. Historians still argue whether such stories grew from genuine belief or deliberate royal PR. Listening now to your poet rehearse a ballad where you personally calm tempests with a gaze. You strongly suspect the second. But royal image isn't only crafted by hired storytellers. It's shaped by accidents, mishaps, and the very human tendency to gossip when bored. Later that day, while walking through the courtyard, you pause to speak with a peasant woman who has brought a basket of eggs. Her hands shake slightly as she bows. You ask where she's travelled from, whether her village has enough grain, whether anyone has fallen sick. You think it's a small moment. She thinks it's enormous. By nightfall, the castle kitchens are buzzing. The monarch spoke gently to a villager, asked about her home, blessed her basket. By the next sunrise, the story in the nearby town will be that you laid your hand on her brow and promised protection. A week later, someone will swear her chickens now lay more eggs than before. Not quite what happened, but close enough for legend. Of course, not all stories are kind. In the evening, as you sit near the hearth reviewing letters, two nobles quarrel quietly at the far end of the hall. You catch fragments: your name, the word hesitant, and something about too cautious with war. One of them believes you should have marched immediately, banners blazing. The other thinks your restraint proved wisdom. Their disagreement will trickle outward as rumor. You're either weak or thoughtful, depending on who's telling it and how much wine they've had. And then there's the matter of your habits. One night you can't sleep and wander the corridors with only a single candle. A maid sees your figure passing silently and whispers to another that you drift like a ghost. By the third retelling, you're a restless spirit who stalks the castle halls on windy nights, worrying over the souls of your people. Honestly, it's not the worst interpretation. Word drifts back that, in the villages, you're known as the king, who cannot rest. Some say you stay awake counting coins. Others say you stay awake praying. One child insists they saw you riding past their house in the middle of the night, even though you were absolutely still in the castle that evening. But argue with a child who has a story, and you will lose forever. In the chapel, your chaplain gently reminds you that your public piety matters, kneeling visibly during major feasts, lighting candles, touching relics, not because heaven needs the performance, but because people do. They want to believe their ruler fears something higher than his own reflection. And so you kneel a little longer where you can be seen. You cross yourself with deliberate care. You let the image of devout monarch grow roots. Meanwhile, the spymaster brings less pleasant reports. Your enemies, he murmurs, are telling a different story. They claim you hoard treasure, while plague nibbles at villages. They claim you feed favorites while barns stand empty. They claim you hesitate out of fear, not caution. You feel a flicker of anger, then let it cool. If you fight every rumor, you'll never sleep again. Instead, You send grain where it's needed, quietly. You dispatch envoys with clear instructions. You let the actions speak, hoping they whisper louder than lies. Still, a part of you realizes the strangest truth of royal life. You will never fully own your own story. When bards sing in taverns, they'll choose the details that make the best melody, not the truest one. When monks write chronicles, they'll emphasize what flatters their patrons. When grandmothers speak by the hearth, they'll fold your reign into stories of comets, bad winters, and that one year the chickens all got sick. Some future listener may hear about you and imagine a stern figure in gleaming armor, always certain, always brave. Another may picture a haunted ruler pacing stone corridors, porridge in one hand and political anxiety in the other. The you, who is real. The you who hates long ceremonies, worries about villages, secretly enjoys dog company more than noble conversation. That version lives mostly in these quiet moments when the hall is empty and the fire burns low. You sit there now, listening to the last embers crackle. Tomorrow, someone will tell a new story about you. Maybe that you smiled at a child. Maybe that you scowled at a noble. Maybe that you saw an omen in the sky. You can't control every tale, but you can choose, again and again, how you move through the world that spins them. And over 1,000 years, those movements awkward, human, imperfect, are what slowly solidify into legend. You wake before dawn, long before the torches burn low enough to beg for relighting, long before the courtiers begin their orchestrated bustle, long before the castle remembers to breathe. The quiet feels strangely gentle this morning, no shouts from the courtyard, no hurried footsteps, no anxious messenger waiting with sealed news. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes at the end of something long and complicated. 1,000 years of medieval royalty are gathering themselves into a single final moment, and you feel it settling into your bones as you rise, wrap your cloak around your shoulders, and step into the corridor. The air is cold, soft, almost thoughtful. You walk alone. Not because your guards aren't posted nearby, they always are, but because today you asked for a small mercy. A morning without anyone watching you breathe. They respected it. Even kings occasionally need silence. You move through the castle's familiar spine, past tapestries that have witnessed generations, past walls that echo with ceremonies, arguments, laughter, prayers, and the unspoken things that linger after candles go out. Past stairways trodden by predecessors whose names are now footnotes or legends or songs or warnings. A mainstream historical fact drifts beside you as the torches sputter awake. By the late medieval era, kingship itself was evolving no longer the simple authority of early warrior rulers, but a layered institution shaped by law, bureaucracy, literacy, and the beginning of something that would one day be called the modern state. You are standing at the hinge between worlds, the medieval one fading slowly behind you, and the early modern one gathering its courage ahead. You step out onto the battlements. The sky is pale, lavender at the edges, the first light brushing across the stone like a blessing. A breeze lifts your cloak. Below, the village stirs. Smoke rises from early hearths. Roosters announce their personal victories. A dog barks once, as if only to remind the world it exists. Your steward approaches quietly, bowing. Your Majesty, the latest reports from the eastern villages. His voice is soft, more hopeful. The sickness appears to be slowing. You exhale, long and deep. Relief never arrives loudly. It exhale whispers. You look over, your realm fields stretching toward the horizon, forests dark and ancient, winding roads, tiny specks of cottages, distant church towers catching the newborn light. This land is flawed, vulnerable, complicated, but it's yours. Not to own, but to steward for one lifetime of many. A quirky historical detail flutters in like a page turning gently. Some monarchs ended their reigns not in battles or ceremonies, but in quiet reflections, long walks, private prayers, letters to heirs, moments where they allowed themselves to feel the weight and wonder of their years. One king famously spent his final months planting trees. Another took to sitting by windows to watch markets open. Another wrote poetry so bad the monks hid it. Historians still argue whether these soft endings meant wisdom or exhaustion. Maybe it was both. You walk slowly along the ramparts, each step a soft farewell to the 1,000-year tapestry you've lived through. You think of everything you've carried, the smoky dawns, The endless etiquette, the betrayals avoided, the dogs and falcons and judgmental peacocks, the cold halls and colder ceremonies, the diplomacy performed with perfumes, the councils that never ended, the journeys across muddy roads, the vault of secrets, the plague nights, the stories people shaped you into, and the truth beneath all of it, that royalty was never about crowns or jewels or carved thrones. It was about living in the middle of the world's heartbeat, with all its chaos and wonder. As the sun rises fully, the warmth touches your face, just barely. For the first time in days, you feel still, present, human, and ready to let the medieval world slowly dim its lantern and step, gently, into history. You turn back toward your chambers, the corridors waiting to wrap around you one last time. 1,000 years come full circle, not with a trumpet or a feast or a proclamation, but with a breath, and a quiet morning that feels like an ending. The castle grows dimmer as you step inside, the light softening into warm gold that pools in the corners like sleeping embers. Your footsteps slow, your breath deepens, the weight of garments, decisions, centuries, all of it loosens, thread by thread, until the only thing you feel is the gentle hush of stone around you. You enter your chamber. The brazier glows low, its warmth rising in long, unhurried waves. A single candle flickers on your bedside table, its flame swaying softly as though nodding you closer. Outside, the wind traces the window, slit with the quiet patience of something ancient and kind. You sit on the edge of the bed, fingers brushing the familiar weave of the coverlet. Every sound has softened the distant murmur of guards, the whisper of rushes underfoot, the faint sigh of the castle settling into evening. Even your own heartbeat seems slower now, steady and unhurried. You lie back beneath the furs. They settle around you gently, warm and reassuring, like the final embrace of a long, traveled journey. Your eyes grow heavy, your breath eases. The world narrows to the soft glow of the candle, and the rhythm of your chest rising and falling. The medieval world drifts farther now, like lantern light fading down a quiet valley. The battles shrink, the whispers fade, the echoes soften, and the 1,000 years you carried settle into a distant, peaceful hum. You're safe here, warm, held. The candle flickers one last time, then steadies into a calm, golden glow. Let it all slip behind you, the weight, the noise, the stories. Just breathe and drift gently into rest.